invite the four of us or something. Nathan, welcome.
Hello, hello. The technical steering committee call just wrapped up.
We were wondering why. we were a couple of minutes past with 4 people in the call, so excellent.
We're a little light on numbers today.
A little bit.
The call today.
You already started recording, it looks like. I'm running the call. I'm pretending to be John today.
All right. So I don't have to say much today. Excellent.
Yep. So in that vein, welcome Ken Ebert to the call, and Renee, welcome and thank you for coming. I'm doing my best Sean impression. Awesome. A couple more minutes to see if anyone else trickles in here.
Yeah, is there a conference we don't know about?
I don't know. I was thinking someone threw a party and didn't invite the rest of us.
Yeah, I'm kind of feeling that same way.
No conference.
Oh, are they in the middle of no right now? I thought that wrapped up yesterday, but I don't know.
Wait, you don't know? Ha.
Everybody's traveling.
That's excellent. Richard Esplin, welcome to the call.
I came in for your dad jokes. Maybe I need to leave.
That was Nathan's dad joke. I just recognized it. No, I promise I will not be talking mostly today. I'm just pretending to be Sean because Sean had something else he needed to be at that was rather important and asked if I would do it and made the deck for me. So this is really easy. I just get to talk. So cool. Okay, well, let's take a minute or two to get started, and then we can move along with our agenda. Welcome to the Hyperledger Indy Working Group call. This is March 28th, 2019. Warning: this call is being recorded, including apparently my dad jokes or Nathan's dad jokes or something. This is a Linux Foundation meeting. And we have an antitrust policy. Linux Foundation meetings involve participation by industry competitors, and it is the intention of the Linux Foundation to conduct all of its activities in accordance with the applicable antitrust and competition laws. Therefore, extremely important that attendees adhere to meeting agendas and be aware of and not participate in any activities that are prohibited under applicable U.S., state, federal, or foreign antitrust and competition laws. Examples of types of actions that are prohibited at Linux Foundation meetings and in connection with the Linux Foundation activities are described in Linux Foundation antitrust policy available at linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. If you have questions about these matters, please contact your company counsel, or if you're a member of the Linux Foundation, feel free to contact Andrew Updegrove of the firm of Gesmer Updegrove LLP, which provides legal counsel to the Linux Foundation. There's also a Hyperledger Code of Conduct. It is here. Let's be nice to each other. Agenda. So starting with housekeeping, we're going to do some updates. Our main conversation is going to be talking about authorization and permissions on the Indy config ledger. That's Artem and Richard. And then the Drummond, hopefully, will be updating us on the trust framework. I'm hoping that Drummond shows up before we get to that point in the call. So some housekeeping. Working group agendas and calls. We'll be moving to the Hyperledger wiki starting next week. It was going to be this week, and then Sean didn't quite get there before he had a prior engagement. So we'll be doing that next week for this particular call. Also like to highlight the bc.gov Code With Us opportunity. This is a bounty-based opportunity for anyone who applies and can get paid to contribute code to these open source projects. Steven, do you want a second to highlight that?
Not a lot to say more than that. We want to put something together related to mobile agents and interacting with the BC Gov agent that we've been building. So we put out a bounty on this and hope to get someone who can work with us now through IIW. So it's a pretty short-term opportunity, and it's $25,000 Canadian to put some code together with us.
Hey, we appreciate you sponsoring the development of this open source stuff, so that's pretty awesome. And then next week, Anvil with Outlier Adventures will be talking with us. Working group updates.
So can I jump in with one more before we go farther?
Yes, you can.
Indy is now an active project at Hyperledger. I know that sounds rather trite when I say it that way, but we just moved from the incubator to the active status. And
Really?
Big compliments to everyone who helped put together that proposal. There actually was no discussion on the technical steering committee call around it. Everyone had already read the pages that were put together that we added to the wiki. They'd already read the email, and they've already seen and experienced the activity going on with Indy at the different events that we've been doing at Hyperledger. So, there really wasn't much comment or discussion. Everyone was pretty excited to go ahead and stamp it as moving to active status. So, thanks everybody. That from my side, that was just really, really great news.
How does that get announced? Is there a tweet we can send out or amplify?
I think that there will be something along those lines at some point. I'm not sure what blessing or secret ceremony has to occur at this point, so I'll try to figure that out.
That is good news, though. It was probably some relief of like, well, finally, So,
that's cause for much celebration. That's wonderful. Finally.
It is wonderful. It was funny. I got volunteered to present one of our quarterly updates and to the committee, and it was their reactions were semi-funny about like, wait a minute, you're overdoing this here. We need to be worried we don't set a precedent for other people. So that was hilarious. But good work, all. It's fantastic to be part of this community. Okay. Working group updates. Agents call is on Wednesday. Yesterday, I have not yet posted the recording, but we'll do so soon. And we talked about Jan and the consent receipts opportunity and how to properly design that. And then we talked about the further discussion on the credentials exchange hype and the message family designed to do that. Also, if you have not heard, we do have the link to this is in the notes of that meeting. We have a 0.1 spec that is being used by everyone who wants to demo something interoperable at IW next month. So if you're building an agent for IW and you want to be interoperable with Credentials Exchange, there is a 0.1 release that they'll be using for that. And that gives us time to finish up the 1.0 release, the first real release of the Credentials Exchange message family. So if you're interested in that, please contact me directly or grab the notes from the Indy agent call, and that has the link to that spec in there. We know it doesn't solve some of the problems that the other one does, but it'll be sufficient for demo purposes. The Indy Semantics call, is anyone willing to report on that?
I can give an update on that. This is Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
We went over some of the work that Robert Midwicki and Paul Knowles were doing to talk about how overlay objects might be stored on the ledger so that they can be shared and used across multiple customers instead of having to repeat them. We talked a little bit about sizing of those objects and how if they're shared, the sizing is less important than if they are writing them each for every type of credential being used. So if they're being reused, the size considerations can be less critical to the design of the objects. And we talked a little bit about the impact of the rich schemas and went over some of the work items that need to be taken care of, including discovery. We'll be circulating some of those work items to see who might from the community be interested in participating and shortening that work effort. End of report.
Awesome. Thank you, Ken. Indy URSA? I don't see Mike. Was anyone else at the Indy URSA call?
He's on vacation this week.
What? I didn't know we gave Mike vacation.
Yeah, the kids, they sort of demand it,
My gosh.
If you count working on his schooling as vacation.
Oh, is he working on his PhD?
That's what I was told. I don't know.
Oh, well, maybe he just told us all that. No, I'm sure he's engaged in something worthwhile, no matter what it is. Was anyone else at the Indy URSA call? Okay, we're going to pass on that one. In the SovCrypto call. Any updates there? That's kind of also Mike and his.
So I can talk a little bit about both of those, absent anyone else here on the call. In the SovCrypto call, we're working a lot on how we can accomplish delegatable credentials and things like transferable credentials. This is the idea that the issuer might be issuing something to someone who's then going to subsequently issue a credential. You could think of this like the car rental company gives the car to a particular car rental company location. That location then rents the car to an individual, and then that individual may delegate the right to drive the car to, say, like the valet at a hotel or at a restaurant. That's a case where there's kind of a chain of credentials involved, and you may need to be able to blind the intermediate steps depending on which interaction you're engaged in. It actually has a lot of similarity to some of the things that we discussed yesterday in the Indy agent call in terms of some of the use cases going on around the chain of custody that is required for consent receipts when the holder of the eventual holder of a credential needs to issue consent back to the issuer. And some of the other types of delegation cases that we were starting to encounter in the wild. There's also been a lot of discussion around the release of URSA 0.1. We built an URSA 0.1 build, and that build was not successful in integration into Indy in particular because the master branch on Indy Crypto was not where most of the code was happening, but not everyone on the team was aware of that. So we're in the process of doing branch reconciliation with Indy Crypto to try to make sure that the URSA release is in sync such that we can move the Indy SDK over to depending on URSA instead of depending on Indy Crypto, so that we can pick up some of the new bug fixes and changes that are going on in the URSA community, in particular some of these important fixes around how revocation functions and how the cryptography can improve going forward. So if you're working on use cases that need some of those types of things that we just talked about, something that looks like credentials like stock certificates, or something that needs those types of delegation use cases, it would be a really good idea to reach out to Mike to make sure that they're aware of your use cases, and that will help them target your needs in particular as they go about that work.
Hey, Nathan, are there any docs on sort of the journey that's going on in that front?
The answer to that is yes, there are, and no, I don't know where they are or what the links are. That's a question we ask Mike.
Yeah, it'd be great to find that out. I'm thinking a lot about delegation, but it's hard to know where to start if there's actually serious work going on already that I'd really like to be able to read and see what's going on with it.
Yeah, and I think the first place to go poking there is a running notes doc for the SovCrypto call and a notes doc going on for the main URSA call as well. Those should have links to all the appropriate documentations and research papers.
Perfect. Thank you, Nathan, for offering those updates. And then the other thing that I'll add, Michael Herman's requested that we draw some attention to the presentation he's done about the URI specification. He's posted that in the chat with a link. I'm not, my slide foo is not quick enough to put it in the slides. But we have, he has a presentation that is well worth watching as well, that talks about the decentralized URI specification. This is different, Michael, than the one that you shared yesterday, isn't it?
This is a slightly updated. Yes, there's really two main webcasts I've created in the last couple of weeks. One is that around the trusted digital web, which is a kind of a vision presentation, and this one's down in the weeds. This is trying to help usher along the discussions in the dead resolution group. But the reason why it kind of has an Indy perspective is I'm focusing just on a specification just for the URI grammar. And when you look at where the URI grammar is used, many different places, including the agent-to-agent protocols, the message request structure. I think it can also be used for extracting attachments out of the DIDCOM structure. So it's fairly lengthy, and but I'm trying to use as many different domains, application domains as possible to make sure that we have a very strong specification for this did URI grammar. It's an independent effort on my part, and hopefully it'll be accepted quite broadly.
Perfect. So take a look at that, and that link is in the Zoom chat.
And before you move on, Sam, we got to get the Indy SDK working group on here. It disappeared from last week.
Oh my gosh. Hey,
you were in the call and you forgot about it.
I did. It's because it was so wonderful. I just had Zen flowery things in my head. You want to report on that?
Yeah, well, there's just two things for most of this group. The first is the agenda is in the wiki. Per Hyperledger policy, we're trying to move everything from Google Docs into the wiki. You can find in the Indy section, there's an area where we have all the agendas that we're adding there. So main topic was conversation about the future of the SDKs, and we want to start spinning up some repos with language idiomatic fat language library wrapper things. I think we're going to call them the language specific libraries. So Indy-SDK-Python, Indy-SDK-Node.js, and we'll do things there that are make things really easy for developers who are comfortable in that language and not as comfortable with Indy. And we want those to end up being the future of Indy, how new developers interact with Indy. When they're, they'll probably pick up an agent first, but if they need the SDK, they'll probably use a language library. And we talked about how that's going to relate to the low-level wrappers, which are within the SDK. So that was a useful conversation. I'm excited to see Sam crank that out over the next 48 hours, per his commitment on the call. I'm teasing. And then the other piece of conversation was on the proposal for the future of SDK 2.0. We have that added in the design doc folder in Indy SDK. I guess there's a pull request for it, so it's not committed. But we're looking for feedback on that. We'll let that sit for a month or so and get feedback from people before we decide how quickly you want to implement it.
Very cool.
In terms of housekeeping there, that one thing is on the maintainers call this week, we decided that we needed to move all of the meeting notes from the rolling Google Doc agendas we've been using in the past. We need to be moving those over to the Confluence Wiki. I know that, especially for the person moving the notes, can entail a little bit of figuring out how Confluence works, but that makes it so that those notes are accessible in places that can't see Google Docs, like for the folks who are starting to contribute in China. So it's important that we make that switch, and we're trying to have that switch finished this week so that all the calls next week will be able to use resources that are not exclusively available in Google Docs. And
we found that concurrent editing in Confluence is better than expected. It was as reliable as Google Docs has seemed, so it worked well. It was nice.
Yes, the only difference there is that the savings is a little bit weird. The changes are all made at the same time, but you have to commit the changes to the wiki. So the workflow is only very slightly different, but it works phenomenally well. So appreciate Richard sort of pioneering that. So very cool. Are we done with announcements? Any other updates before we get on to our main discussion topics? Okay, Artem and Richard, you're up for talking about the authorization permissions on the Indy config ledger. I'm assuming you have stuff to share?
Yes, I'll let Artem share screen.
Okay, I'll stop so that you can.
So as a bit of preamble, I want to explain that we've been working on adding an audit ledger to Indy for the last 4 months. We identified a specific class of bugs. I should pause. We're working on improving the permissions in Indy for the past 5 months and making it more flexible, making it easier for the Sovrin network to meet their permission requirements without forcing everybody else to adopt the same thing. And so part of that is moving permissions to the config ledger. And as part of that, we recognize that then there's a dependency between the domain ledger and the config ledger. Do you have the right permission at the time that a specific transaction happened on the domain ledger? So we've been adding the audit ledger, and that's addressed a whole class of bugs. That was supposed to be released at the end of March. In our final testing, we found some additional bugs that'll probably take another week to fix. And so at this point, we think we're going to scrub the March release and just go for the April release that includes the audit ledger and the new permissions on the config ledger. So expect that in the second half of April. So as part of that, we want everybody to be aware of what these changes are. So the key thing that changes is the way you authorize a steward or a trustee or an endorser to do something moves to the config ledger. And you can decide how many signatures is necessary for an action to happen. So we added multi-signature, which is one of the key things. So we can say, hey, it takes 3 signatures to create a new trustee. It takes 2 trustees to create a new steward, things like that. So Artem is going to show us how specifically to use the Indy CLI to update these transactions on the config ledger so that you can set up your own permission schemes in your Indy stuff. And so expect this as part of the April release. Is that a good summary, Artem? Anything you want to add?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good summary. I also like to tell that new stable version of Indy has been released just a day ago, and I'm going to use this last version in the CLI and Indy to show this demo. So I'm going to start, as Richard told a moment ago. SDK now supports new transaction to changing and reading authentication rule. This function accepts multiple parameters. Actually, first 5 of them describes the type of an action you are going to do. Is it editing of any record or ledger or adding new one? And the last one is this constraint, is a set of rules which transactional author should specify. There is a table in the node repo which listed all these constraints are present in config ledger now. It's impossible to add new one, but trustees can change any of them or read them. So now I want to show how to use Indy CLI to change any authentication rule, and then I will use schema transaction, for example. I'll try to send a new schema to the ledger from a user which doesn't have any role. I'm expecting to get a reject from ledger, and then I try to change authentication rule for this type of an action and repeat sending schema again. So I have an opponent in the CLI. I already have done some preparation like creating an open wallet, pool. I have 2 DIDs, the first one with trustees role and second one without any role. And now I'd like to change my active DID on the user who doesn't have a role. Next, I would like to try to send schema transaction to the ledger. Type schema, name test, version 1.0, and attributes tested. So as I expected, I get reject from ledger. This message tells us that only either trustee or steward or trust anchor can send schema transaction to the ledger, but my user doesn't have any of this role. Now I want to switch back to trusted DID. Use. Okay, and now I'll send the authentication rule transaction to ledger to allow everyone write any schemas to ledger. So let's type ledger auth command. This command, as I mentioned before, has multiple params. Let's fill them. Text and type schema, action add, field any, and value any. And now, as last parameter, I have to set a constraint for this type of action. I have some tip. I have this constraint. This constraint actually means that anyone can send this transaction. There must be at least one signature, and the third parameter is the type of this constraint. Actually, there is 3 types of constraint. This final role constraint and also or constraint will allow combined role constraint to specify multiple cases. So let's send this transaction. I think something I want to put an additional quotes. So this constraint because it contains spaces. So success, we sent new notification rule. Let's check it's actually has been written to the ledger. Let's send read request. Get those rule command. And this command has almost the same params. This one except the constraint read. Yeah, as expected, a new constraint has been written. And now let's change back. Let's use my did without trust anchor role, trust role, did use, and try to send schema again. I'll have this comment in history. Yeah, this time we successfully write schema to ledger. Let's check it's where actually there is. Send schema, name test, version 1.0, bit. Yeah, schema has been written, and now every user can send schema transaction. In the same way, trustees can change any identification rule has written in the config ledger. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Any questions?
So how do we expect that to be used in a business context? Like, I assume we're not going to do that command. Anyone can write a schema.
So there's two scenarios that it's going to be useful. The first is the people who are administering a network, like the Sovrin network, they're going to use whatever policies get adopted by the governance board. They're going to use these commands to enter those in, and people can query and figure out what the governance is. It can be, you can audit and be transparent. The second use case is the developer use case, where you're setting up your own network and you don't like whatever Indy shipped with because it's too restrictive for whatever reason, or maybe it's too loose, whatever. You can set up whatever commands you think are appropriate for your development environment.
Okay, and I heard, how does this does not change the credential def thing where somebody can write a credential def on behalf of somebody else?
Correct. This says, you're correct.
Yeah.
The role of a transaction author and how that transaction author can delegate to somebody else, with the relationship between an endorser and an author, this doesn't change that. That stays exactly the same. In fact, it's still called a trust anchor, not even an endorser in the code.
Right.
But but it does move all these permissions to the config ledger. So as we change them in the future, we can do it in a more flexible way. It's a stepping stone.
Cool. Yep. Got it. Okay.
Excellent question, Stephen. Anybody else?
I wanted to check on that same thing. That so is it true that the role now called transaction endorser in the sovereign governance framework maps to what is trust anchor on the ledger?
That is correct. We have a story for renaming trust anchor to an endorser, but we haven't got to that yet. And for the broader group, trust anchor, Drummond proposed that term really belongs in the business solutions industry tier. The trust anchor is the person who's anchoring the trust for all insurers in France or all accredited universities in America, and saying here's who's accredited, here who's in that organization, industry body. It's probably more natural to call them a trust anchor. And other blockchains use the term endorser to be the person who is endorsing, is approving a transaction onto the ledger. And so our use of trust anchor there was kind of odd. So we figured we should rename that and bring it more in line with the rest of the industry. Is that a good summary, Drummond, of our reasoning?
Yeah, exactly. No, I was just wanted to make sure that folks, because if they start reading Sovereign Governance Frameworks V2 docs, and they're going to see transaction endorser, and they're going to see a different definition for trust anchor. So we do call that out actually in the glossary and say, hey, the old definition is still what's in the code.
Yeah, yep. We're going to fix that over time.
Yeah.
I'm surprised somebody's not asked. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, go ahead. You just about to tell us the questions that we should be asking, so tell us.
Yeah. I'm surprised nobody's asked us what the default rules are for Indy. And I was about to ask Artem. I know we discussed what the default rules should be, but I'm actually unclear about what the default rules we implemented are. Do you have that list of default rules, Artem?
Yes, this is in the node repo documents. There are a table where these default rules are listed, and I will send the link to the chat.
So that document was updated to be the default rules. That's excellent. That's what I wanted to check. Over time, the idea currently Indy ships with rules that are very similar to what the Sovrin network wants. But over time, we'd like Indy to ship with very open rules for the developer use case, because that's going to be more common. And then we can have a script in the Sovrin repos that sets up the Sovrin rules. That's our vision over time. We don't have that done yet. And so the default rules is the document that Artem showed at the beginning. And we'd like to move it towards one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten is as a developer, you have to learn a lot about the system to get anything done. And one way we can make that simpler is you don't need 3 signatures to do to do basic stuff.
Particularly on a test network, that's really helpful.
Yeah, but again, we don't have that done yet, and that's an area where if somebody wanted to contribute that fix, the default rules and the Sovrin script, that would be gladly received. So, did I predict your question, Sam?
No, but I'm glad you told us that we should have asked it. So that was helpful.
So what was your question?
No questions. This is fantastic work.
Well, I recognize we've used our time, and Drummond has a lot to share with us. So, last call for questions or comments. And of course, you can reach us on Rocket Chat or the Zoom chat, whatever works.
So, are the SDK meetings occurring regularly now?
It is every other Wednesday. It's 8 a.m. Mountain. Which is going to be 3 p.m. GMT or 3 p.m. UK time. I always forget whether it's summertime or GMT, but yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I'll be done then. Thanks for your help, Artem.
Thank you, Richard and Artem, for reporting on that work, and we're looking forward to that upcoming release. Excellent. Drummond, are you ready to talk about the Sovereign Trust Framework?
I can do that, yes, as a matter of fact.
Didn't we call it the Sovereign Governance Framework, or is it just mistyped in the slide?
Well, I got here a little late, so I didn't see it on the agenda, but yes, it is called the Sovereign Governance Framework. In fact, I've got a nice little picture of it.
About the same time we renamed trust anchors to endorsers, we renamed trust frameworks to governance frameworks.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah, there you go. Well, we've renamed. I'll talk about the glossary here in a minute. So this is just a short update for folks to understand where it's at with the whole version 2 of the Sovereign Governance Framework, formerly known as Sovereign Trust Framework. Yeah, we actually changed the name about. When did we do that? I think it was like last fall sometime. But we just found governance framework was much easier for people to understand generally what the purpose of it was, because that's what people think of when it comes to blockchains is governance. And trust framework is more of an identity management term. Of course, we have a blockchain or distributed ledger for identity management. So we started calling it trust framework, and now we call it governance framework. And if you go look in the glossary, you will actually see we made them synonyms, so it doesn't matter which term you use. So what you're looking at here is the master document, and I'm just briefly going to, I expect a lot of folks on the call are already familiar with where it's at, so I'm going to cover it quickly and just take questions. Yesterday morning, the Sovrin Foundation Board of Trustees approved the final documents in the version 2. The whole second generation is what we refer to as the Sovereign Governance Framework. So the root document of the whole architecture is this one, the master. It's called the master document, and so we have and we version now every document. So there's a procedure we'll follow to revise any document in this set. We've made it a much more modular architecture for the whole thing. We're also finishing, hopefully this morning. We wanted to be done yesterday, but we ran into a problem with the Sovrin Foundation website and updating permissions of all things. So all these docs are going to be in two forms on the Sovrin Foundation site. There's going to be a PDF of the official approved version, so it's locked in and doesn't change. And then there's going to be all the docs that have been available for the last year, or I mean, as long as they've existed, as Google Docs, which are what we call the living community versions. So in all the docs, you will find this statement right here that this one's going to be the official document, and but there's a link to the living community version for anyone who wants to comment or suggest changes or improvements into the future. And so, and the master doc has a brief introduction to the whole thing. So I'll just point out a couple key things. The whole purpose of the Sovereign Governance Framework, besides providing governance for the sovereign ledger and the sovereign network, the set of agents that use the sovereign ledger, is to be a foundation for other domain-specific governance frameworks. That's the term defined in the glossary. There's one in particular that is called out to be an action item for the Sovereign Governance Framework Working Group that's responsible for producing this, and that's called the Sovereign Web of Trust Governance Framework, which is going to define a set of credentials for discovering and verifying domain-specific governance frameworks. It's how you actually create a web of trust. So you can actually know that some business that is giving you, an employee from a business, for example, that's giving you a verifiable credential being an employee. Well, how do I know that business is a legitimate business? What governance framework is governing credentials, and who are the trust anchors that could assure me that's a legitimate business? Someone like, for instance, GLIFE, the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. They can do that, or a credential registry for a governance framework like Orgbook in BC. So all of those are ways to verify credentials and satisfy verifiers. And so we think there are going to be hundreds, thousands of domain-specific governance frameworks. And there are already several trust communities, is the term we use, that are working with the governance framework working group to start to create these. So, so that is what is a little unusual about the Sovereign Governance Framework, because it is a foundation for all of these guys. We provide a few examples there. Now, here is a overview of the architecture for anyone who wants to go in and say, I want to understand this. The one you're looking at here is the master document. As I said, it's more or less the root. There are a set of 3 legal agreements that are associated with it. You see them listed. I'll scroll up here, right here. There is the steward agreement, which is an agreement with Sovereign Foundation between all the stewards who run nodes of the network. And then we found, for legal and GDPR reasons, that we needed to, because it is a public permission network, we needed a transaction author agreement so that, as we move towards the point where anyone can write to the network, we're not there yet. We're still in permission right access, as Richard just explained at Artem. But we are moving towards public right access. That will require the sovereign token to get there, so that anyone can acquire the token and pay the associated fee to write to the sovereign ledger. But it will truly be anyone. There will not be any restrictions when we get to that point. But there will be the transaction author agreement that anyone has to say, yeah, I agree. That I'm not supposed to put illegal data on the ledger, that kind of thing. In the current situation, we have a second role or second agreement with what are called transaction endorsers, and those are organizations that say, hey, I want to have write permission to the sovereign ledger before we have public write access. And that's a legal agreement that they sign up to say, yep, I will abide by the governance framework, and I will pay the associated fees in regular old fiat currency, and where you go. So those are the 3 legal agreements that are needed. Now, all the policies that are not, this is a very high level, we call this the constitutional layer. All the specific policies governing various things, and I can jump over and show you a list of them, are in these control documents. There are, I think it's 8 or 9 of them. But for instance, steward business policies for selecting stewards and qualifying stewards, activating them is one, and then there's one on technical requirements, and there's one on the ledger access policies, and all that stuff are in control documents. And then there's the glossary, which I'm going to show you in a minute, which is just been a huge effort, but is the one glossary that's used by all of these documents. And then over here on this side, we have the trust assurance framework, which is not actually a governance document directly over the network and the ledger. It is a way to for any actor and any set of policies here to measure their conformance, or to certify, I guess, their performance. So that's that one over there. We are working on this white paper over here, which will be an introduction to the whole thing, such as I'm giving you right here. Maybe we'll just record a video and be done with it. Anyway, I'm not going to go like down into the specifics. I just wanted to give folks a general review. I do want to point out, however, that the new or the official Sovrin glossary is a tool for all of you, anyone in the community or anyone outside of the Sovrin community who wants to just reference these definitions. Unlike all the other docs, there will be a PDF of this, but what we're going to keep is the Google Doc hosted version of it, because it's got this wonderful feature that you can link directly to any definition of the almost 250 definitions in this document. And all you do is you click in the heading and copy the URL, and it will have a wonderful little heading identifier that will link you right to that. So again, I'm not going to sit here. I will actually turn around and say, let's go look at Trust Anchor. No, let's first look at, excuse me, Transaction Endorser. Right now is yeah, I can think well this time of the morning. So here is Transaction Endorser. An organization authorized under permission right access. That's another defined term of the policies for, for permission right access. To authorize a transaction by digitally signing it, so it will be accepted by a validator node. It is, this role is only needed for permission right access. It is not needed for public right access. So if you're wondering, well, what does public right access really mean? Let's pop up to the P's and find PQR. There we go. Public right access right there. All right. So this turns around and tells you, hey, this is a set of policies defined the governing how identity owner may write a transaction directly to the Sovrin ledger without needing to go through an authorized transaction endorser. And then we have a reference, which we're going to go be filling these in with links to the actual PDFs that you can go look up and see those policies in this controlled document, Sovrin Ledger Access Policies. So that's and again, any one click, you can grab and link to any of these. I do want to point out to everyone, so what is the new definition of a trust anchor? ST. All right, there it is right there. Okay, so we've moved this up to a higher layer, as Richard was explaining. A trust anchor is an issuer of credentials who's considered by a verifier or governance authority to be authoritative for a particular set of claims and credentials. Okay, so they don't all have to be, officially named, and you can have informal trust anchors that are just recognized, such as all the government agencies in VC that are issuing credentials for the org book today. There is no formal trust framework. They are going to work on that. You can also, of course, set up one that's formally set up and accredited. So you get all those different options that will be coming. Now, I have one more thing to point out to you, which is there's just an unending 250 set of definitions in here. And it's not, we didn't mean it to be impenetrable, it's a glossary, right? But in order to make it much, much more accessible, we said, let's write a set of appendices. So the definitions take about 36 pages, but these appendices that actually explain this stuff are another 30 pages. There's 8 of them. And they are intended to be very readable. Every one starts out with a diagram to really walk you through, okay, these core terms, for instance, what's a sovereign entity? What's a sovereign identity? Why is it contextual to connections? What's a wallet? What goes in a wallet? And what are each of these keys? So every term that appears in one of these is in the glossary, and we just go through and explain them in, as best we can. It's not exactly always layman's explanations, but you can see most of them are 3 to 4 pages. They across the 8 glossaries, 30 pages. There's a whole taxonomy that hundreds of hours, well, maybe tens of hours, maybe hundreds of hours. You add it all up. And one thing I like to point out about this, everything from here over was already in the first version. What happened, the branch that got built out in the second generation is under thing. We realized we needed to subclass thing in order to have policies that apply to natural things like animals and other, literally rivers, geographic formations, all those things that are naturally with us and under law have natural rights. Many of those things, especially animals, differentiated from man-made things. And only man-made things have the option of being active or passive. And active means they can actually have an agent and keys and wallets, things like drones and autonomous cars and stuff like that. A very different set of policies versus passive things that don't have any of those things, but can be represented by an agent and keys and wallets so basically anything you can identify, any place of any kind can turn around and have a self-sovereign identity as a passive thing. And by the way, that differentiation nicely parallels over here. Individuals are divided into independents and dependents for the same reason. Independents can be truly self-sovereign because they can have devices with keys and wallets and agents, and dependents like newborn childs, like Marcus's, as I understand, about 5-year-old new second daughter. I just got the news this morning. Or elderly parents or refugees or whoever can't, they still have the right to self-sovereign identity. They just need to use a guardian and so then that takes us to, I'm going to just briefly show you, there's an entire appendices explaining the critical differences between these 3 different types of control relationships. And this, of course, will get much deeper as all you fine gentlemen do all the work on defining delegation and, via credentials and everything else. I'll just briefly show you one of the diagrams we're using the most now is in Appendix D. It's a very long explanation of all that stuff. It's this one about the 4 layers of sovereign architecture, sovereign infrastructure. The ledger layer, the agent layer, the credential exchange as a set of interaction patterns using the agent-agent protocol. And finally, the all-important governance framework layer, which is how all the value is ultimately delivered. So, all you tech guys can just code up everything, but it's, the lawyers and policy folks that will ultimately rule all. I'm not hearing any reaction to that.
So I'll give you one, Drummond. Isn't the exchange of credentials meaningless without the governance frameworks?
Oh, beautiful. Yes, exactly.
Meaning, shouldn't it be the other way around?
Oh, well, in terms of layering what the governance, the governance framework is less of a technical. In other words, to the extent it's a technical stack, the governance framework layer actually ends up being a set of credential definitions. So it's a specialization of, in other words, if you are issuing, let's take CU Ledger issuing a credential of credit union membership, right? There's a credential exchange layer where they actually define, where they have the credential and you can go get it and everything. But what that credential means is, and can you confirm that that issuer is actually a member of a governance framework, and there's a credential that you can look for to prove that. That's the governance framework layer. That's why we put them that way. You could argue it either way, but we conceptually stack them up this way. So, and I'll just finish quickly by pointing out that the last 4 appendices turn around and go deeply into each of the roles and operation of each of these 4 layers. So you can see You want to understand, well, how do you actually, what is permission right access, public right access to the sovereign ledger? That's in Appendix E. This is a diagram we put together to really sort of blow up and understand what is happening at the agent-to-agent layer, right? All the richness of what agents are doing. Then there's the classic diagram of verifiable credential exchange, and then we added one for insurance to understand, and then the trust framework roles and that stuff. So that's it. I just wanted to let you guys know, and again, you can link to everything in the doc, including any appendices. So if you're writing documentation where you're like, hey, there's an explanation of this term or set of terms, you can just click on that, copy the URL, and you will link there. And this version I'm showing you is now going to be frozen. You can view it, you can link to it, but you can't edit here. Like I was explaining, if you go to the very top, there is a link to the living community version, which is this version here, which looks just like it, except anyone can comment. So that's, I think that's everything I wanted to cover. And questions?
Every conversation with Drummond is a masterclass in how to turn these philosophical and technical solutions into things that can actually be used by real industries and organizations.
I think that's cool. I hope. Anyway, any questions? Or we can get on to the next agenda item. There's only 7 minutes left.
Is the plan for these to always live as Google Docs, or are they going to move to GitHub or some other public location?
That is the plan. Now, first of all, as I mentioned, all of these, every doc, including the appendices, all of them are being PDF'd and going on the Sovrin Foundation website. So that's now going to become the, at least until we then move them into GitHub, that will be the official repository. I think we will go through another step once the Sovrin Foundation staff is ready to do it, of converting all of them to GitHub docs and then doing change control there. Any other questions? Cool. By the way, we'll put in the chat. Later today you'll be able to get to. There's already links to most of these there, but the official PDFs will all be there on this page that I just put in the chat. And you can also, it's very easy to Google. Just Sovereign Governance Framework will take you right to that page. So that's all I got.
Awesome, Drummond. We appreciate your lengthy efforts in this capacity.
Well, I want to credit, there's, as you saw there's over 30 folks that are a member of that working group that have been contributing, including many folks on this call. Michael Herman did a whole utility that analyzes the thing in his architecture reference ARM, I forget what the M is, model. And others, many of you have contributed to those definitions and other parts. So thank you all.
Awesome. Pretty fantastic. If there's no other questions for Drummond, then we are at the open discussion section of our agenda. Are there any topics that we want to talk about? If you've been itching to say something, now's your chance. Michael, would you be interested in giving us just a several minute overview of the work you've been doing recently? You've been sharing links for? Or should we just go watch it?
Well,
We'll go through it in some detail next week.
Yeah.
I could take you through the first couple pages. It might be good actually to have a little bit of framing because it's possible that people get confused.
We literally only have like 4 minutes, but why don't you take 3 of those and give us an outline?
Okay, I'm just bringing up the PowerPoint now. Was it ready? Share screen. So this kind of documents some changes that were just made last night. So what the goal here is to focus just kind of on this kernel of the parser and the did URI grammar. And so I used to call it the did URL spec, and now call it the did URI spec. And the idea, well, on the bottom left here, is that at most basic level, a did URI is an identifier, a unique specification for what instance of a document is to be returned from a resolver or whatever. And I look very broadly, I guess we'll just use this next slide, not only in like the did specification and the did resolution work, but I also looked at the agent-to-agent hypes that, messaging hypes that use some sort of a did type of construct. And then there's a few things that I added. This slide tells you a couple different things. If you look at the first 3 lines in green, modulo some syntactic changes or syntactic suggestions, it's the diversity of documents that are produced on the right. So we get did documents, did document fragments, but if you, number 3 is what we used to call the semicolon notation. You actually get a remapped service endpoint URI. You don't get a did document, you don't get a did fragment. So even if you just stay within the original did spec domain of things, there's a lot of diversity. And then people started talking about getting at these content fragments. And then I looked again more broadly, and you can see some of the examples here. So the status of this, this is a community member contribution. This is something I put together myself. So it's on the left there, kind of where that green bar is. I want to feed it into the things that we're doing in did spec and did resolution. And I really believe there's a role to finally define this reusable grammar and a reference implementation of the parser. And I'll just leave it at that. I think that gives people a kind of sense of where I'm headed.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. And again, there's more links shared in the Zoom chat and also in the agent meeting notes as well, contains those links. So appreciate you doing that. And with that, we are about out of time. Just quickly here.
Yeah, one quick thing, Sam, just to let folks know, there is a set of calls on the did spec. We're working calls on the did spec and the did resolution spec. First one's at 1 o'clock Pacific today, and the second one's at 2 o'clock Pacific, so they're back to back. And for anyone who's not on the credentials, well, there are 4 credentials community group members, so if you're not a member, you should join up there if you're interested in those calls. It's pretty easy to do that. There's no fees or anything. I just want to give everyone a heads up, a reminder. We'll send out a reminder email about that too.
Thank you. And then please keep the conversation going on Rocket Chat. Here are the various channels on the Hyperledger Rocket Chat that contain the various aspects of what we've been talking about. So appreciate everyone coming today and those presenting, and we will see you all the next time around. Thanks, folks.
Excellent moderation skills, Sam.
Well, I'm practicing. I'm not quite to Sean level, but I can aspire.
There are a few that are at Sean level.
Indeed. Indeed.
See ya.
All right, folks. Have a great week.